Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the garden. This video is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be our 2020 garden rewind, and with all the jacked up stuff that's been going down in 2020, we need a little bit goodness. So we're going to take a look way back in January, woo, seems like forever ago, and see what was actually going on in the hoop house. Before we get started, if you like this video, please feel free to leave a comment. It means so incredibly much to me, and more importantly to the YouTube algorithm. Last video, you guys left tons of comments and it made such a huge difference. I wanted to say thank you, and just kind of a friendly reminder. Let's get started. As you can see, this time last year, I had so much stuff in the hoop house. Everything was looking great. It is so different, comparatively speaking, to where I'm at this year. This year has been a total disaster in terms of getting the hoop house ready and taking care of plants and transplanting. You can see I have some really nice transplants of our hardy annual flowers. We even had weeds creeping up already. Weeds haven't even started growing in my hoop house. I'm so far behind. But we had our hardy annual flowers, like our scabiosa, and we had some forget-me-nots and ranunculus and anemones, and lots of love and a mist nigella. That's crazy to me that last year, this time, I was so far ahead of the game. Our snapdragons were covered in weeds. It's gonna happen. But I don't even have snapdragons this year in the hoop house. And our bells of Ireland were getting very tall. But just overall, things in January last year were so much different than they are this year. That's for sure. We even had some of our daffodils starting to come up at the beginning of February. And a lot of times the beginning of February is the coldest part of the year here in my garden. Towards the end of February, we definitely warm up. But last year, or this year, however you want to say it, I definitely didn't really have much of a problem keeping everything warm. It was a pretty mild winter. Hopefully this winter will be mild as well. However, we have had some really cold temperatures the last few days. And in February, this is when I also begin to winter sow. You can see this year I constructed this winter sowing low tunnel. I put a layer of plastic on the ground to keep the weeds out because, let's face it, in a low tunnel, those weeds will grow like crazy because we are essentially creating an environment that is perfect for germination, and that includes germination of weed seeds and grass growth. So all I did was stick some low tunnel hoops on there and cover this with just a 6mm plastic that I got from the home improvement store. Now, if you are going to consider winter sowing in February and you live in a pretty cold climate like I do here in Kentucky, zone 6B, during the winter, of course that's subjective. Other people might think it's not cold here, but I personally do. You want to start off, of course, with your hardy annual flowers. Those are the first ones that we are going to winter sow. Those, of course, are the ones that have some tolerance to cold because it's still very much cold here and we're still getting lots of frost and things. So we want to make sure that we are only sowing seeds in our trays or milk jugs that are going to be able to handle cold. If you have any questions regarding that, I am going to have a winter sowing ebook available. It's already available if you click the store shelf down there. It's just not showing up on YouTube yet. Just because they have to review it or something. I don't know how it works. Either way, it's down there, and it has a list of stuff that I sow, winter sow in February and things. Also, that list is on my blog, and you can watch the video Flowers to Sow in Fall, and that will give you a good idea of which flowers are tolerant to cold and which ones are not. I will put a card in that. As March arrives here in the garden, that's when I start winter sowing things that are more tender, more frost tender, because my last frost date is approaching in April here in my yard. So about a month before my last frost date arrives, I can start kind of winter sowing various tender annuals which cannot tolerate frost. In doing so, once germination occurs, it is going to be so important that I protect these delicate little seedlings on nights where a frost is predicted. Now, thankfully, my springtime weather warms up pretty quickly, so it's not an everyday thing. You know, sometimes it'll be warm at night, sometimes it won't. On those nights that it's not, I'll have to cover them up with a frost blanket or something like that. It's important to know if the seeds haven't germinated, you don't have to take care of them. You don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to be cold. I get that question a lot. I think in a lot of the upcoming videos about winter sowing, I'm definitely going to be repeating myself. Here is a look inside the hoop house. In March, you can see that I have the hoop house completely opened. As soon as the warmer temperatures arrive in March here, you can see the trees are still bare, but as soon as the sun comes out, that hoop house is getting hot, and I have to make sure to account for that. Also around March, our daffodils start to bloom. Things like our collards and kale were looking really good. I had some leftover vegetables that I had planted in the garden this year. And we start seeing the first emergence of our tulips, which is so incredibly exciting. I love tulips. I was obsessed with tulips last year. Anna ordered a ton this year. Hopefully the ones this year grow. We planted them a little bit late, but I am optimistic. Lots of the double tulips, and our peonies also started to emerge in March. Interesting to see if those will bloom this year. This is the second year. And overall, the hoop house looked great. We still had problems with weeds. By the time March arrives, I really could probably just take this cover completely off the hoop house, because most of these plants in this hoop house, you'll remember, are cold tolerant. So even if we do get an off kind of colder night, it's usually not so cold that I will need to protect them. Also seeing a lot of the perennials starting to green up a little bit at this time of the year and getting ready for a growth spurt. When April finally does arrive in the garden, things are getting big, and if they haven't bloomed yet, they will be blooming very soon, a lot of them, in terms of the things in the hoop house, like our forget-me-nots, which you see here, as well as our anemones are coming into full bloom around this time. Usually the anemones start blooming in March, but for me, this variety that I had this year was a little bit of a late bloomer. I don't know if that was the weather or just the variety that I had. Hopefully our anemones that we planted in the fall will do well. Fingers crossed for that. We'll also see a lot of the annuals start to elongate and get taller, like this salvia. A lot of the times you'll notice the plants really start to stretch before they bloom and get nice and tall, so that we can use them in cut flower arrangements. We also see our first blooms with pansies and bulbs and things like muscari and crocus, and just lots and lots of beautiful stuff this month. And it's one of the reasons I love April so much, is things are finally coming into bloom. We also have our daffodils blooming, but we also might have just a swing in weather, as you can see when it started snowing on the daffodils for some reason. You know, your guess is as good as mine, but you know, the weather is unpredictable. Fortunately, things like the daffodils are tough and hardy and robust, and they didn't even really care that they got snowed on. And that's great, because I was able to pick some really beautiful vases full of these flowers. In addition to the daffodils, of course, we began picking these gorgeous, beautiful ranunculus around the second week of April. These are the Labelle series. Followed by the Labelle series was the Amandine series, which bloomed a little bit later, which was kind of nice to have that staggering of blooms, which I thought just was so convenient, especially since I love ranunculus so much. And the longer the ranunculus bloom, the better. We also had the Salmon Elegance, which was hands down my favorite. They are so elegant, I guess that's where they get their name. I don't know. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get any of these this year, so I'm kind of bummed about that. But otherwise, we have some really beautiful colors returning to this year's garden. Hopefully, if they make it through the weather, if they make it through my neglect, which have really been not taking care of the garden. Either way, you can see that April, it's easy to see that April is one of my favorite months in terms of blooms, because we've been waiting through this cold winter so long, and finally it warms up, and we've got ranunculus and we've got tulips. We've got these gorgeous double tulips in bloom. These also seem to bloom the first week of April to the second week of April for me, and I can store them in the fridge for just a little bit longer if I really dedicate myself to keeping them around. In the future, I would love to get a floral fridge. I think that would be awesome to be able to store these efficiently. For now, I'm just learning and enjoying what I can. We had lots of beautiful ones like Columbus tulip, which we're growing again this year. And of course, we had the favorite of everyone, it seems. We had some La Belle Époque, which are those beautiful creamy colored double tulips with the kind of dark purple throat-ish. I don't know what you would call it, but we had lots of really pretty ones. Also, in April, we're going to start pre-sprouting our dahlias. We have some very nice dahlia tubers. You want to make sure that you're buying quality tubers, of course. And all I do to pre-sprout them at the end of the month is I just lay them out in the tray and cover them with potting soil. Just kind of nestle them in there. All these tubers look really great. I had really good results ordering tubers last year from kind of independent retailers. And I put them in my winter sowing low tunnel, give them a nice warm toasty start. Of course, protect them on nights that get cooler and, you know, get that growth going because our last frost date is quickly approaching. So we got to be ready to transplant these whenever they are ready. You can see they grow really quickly for the most part once they start to sprout. And in May, I was still a little bit behind, so I was taking cuttings of dahlias at this point to make even more of my own dahlia plants. Ideally, the cuttings should be taken a little sooner than what I did, but like I said, I was way behind the schedule, you know. I'm only one person. Either way, in May, a lot of our biennials started to bloom, and that included these amazing foxgloves. If you remember, we planted these foxgloves 2 Aprils ago now, so it wasn't this April, but it was the April before that we planted those. They started to bloom. We also had our sweet peas that were in the middle of the low tunnel started to bloom, and man, you know, I don't have the greatest weather for growing sweet peas, but they're so pretty. We also had things like our Love in a Mist Nigella. This is the Delft Blue Nigella that also started to bloom in this month, as well as our Larkspur, which started to bloom in this month. As you can see, once we pass April, the yard is just filled with blooms. It's out of control. But I love it. I love this early season color. It's a great way to get early season bouquets and things. Our Canterbury Bells looked really nice. And by the time June arrived, our peonies arrived, as well as our forget-me-nots came into full bloom. And I really love the combination of these peonies and forget-me-nots. I thought they were so pretty, just this kind of pink and blue dynamic between the two. Also, a lot of filler foliage started blooming, like we have our Bupleurum and our Salvia Sage, which you see is the kind of purple color, and our yellow Calendula just started to open up. Just lots and lots of choices in the cut flower garden for cut flower arrangements. And really a fun time to just, you know, play with the flowers and see what you can create. Unfortunately, this year we weren't able to donate any of our flowers because, you know, whatever. Also, our lilies started to bloom. This was the first year planting for some very small lily bulbs that I had propagated. And even though our frost date had passed, we had just now transplanted our zinnias. The status were coming in the bloom. The stalk were coming in the bloom. I'm feeling tired. Whew, I'm getting out of breath talking about all this stuff. We also had some really, really beautiful roses, as well as some scabiosa. Also, coming up, you're going to see the snapdragons, another one of my absolute favorites. The snapdragons that we overwintered bloomed a little sooner, but this planting that you're seeing now was actually made from a sowing in the beginning of April, transplants in the beginning of April. So I was able to actually get 2 different crops of snapdragons last year, which is something really cool for me because, you know, I grow in my little teeny tiny backyard and I'm always looking for ways to expand my growing. Also, we have some of our perennials. Our Shasta daisies blooming, which are really just kind of a cute addition to cut flower arrangements. And some of those drumstick alliums, or however you say that, you can see kind of nestled in there. By the end of the month, you can see that our zinnias went crazy. They went absolutely bonkers. You can see that we transplanted our dahlias going through the middle in that far left row. The heat and the humidity and everything just combined, all the rain that we get. You can see that the zinnias were quickly taking over the garden. It would be important that I would actually need to stake these zinnias to make sure that they didn't start falling over and taking over things. You can also see there's a lot of grass in the garden, you know. It's just one of those things. I'm not going to hide my grass from you guys. Sorry. Bees were loving it. I was loving it. Everything was looking really good. We were right on track to keep kind of growing. Had some Lavaterra coming in the bloom. The Scabiosa were finishing up bloom, and we also had, of course, the Status by the end of the month finishing up bloom. Really just everything was really just coming to a close in terms of the hardy annual flowers, and that's what we really wanted, because we had to take all those hardy annual flowers out of the flower beds and replace them with tender annuals that I'd kind of been stalling on and delaying. We have these really nice bells of Ireland here. I'm not the best at growing bells of Ireland. I'm still working on understanding it, honestly. I wish I had tips for you guys, but I've just really struggled with them. So, you know, at the end of this month, we're making the last of our hardy flower arrangements with things like pansies. Our pansies are finishing up. Because before July arrives, the arrival of July is really a time that gets blazing hot where I am. So we had things like the Godetia or Clarkia finishing up, and they seemed to struggle. They absolutely hated my weather. The plants looked terrible. That's one of the main reasons you guys didn't see very many of the Godetia and Clarkia. This was the Farewell to Spring mix, or Salmon Grace mix rather, I'm sorry. And it just struggled the whole time. This was made from an early April planting, and it just didn't do well. Also during this time, finishing up with a lot of perennials like Yarrow. This is the Colorado mix Yarrow, which is just a lovely collection of just pastel antique shades, which is so beautiful. Last but not least, in this month, we have a lot of the annuals finally getting into the ground, things like the Azuratum and the removal of the last of the early blooming plants. So I took out all the feverfew, as you see here. I took out all the snapdragons, all the larkspur. I just completely took it out because there was no longer any room for it, and they needed to be replaced with something else. You know, that's just how it is with a small yard. I'd love to let the stuff keep blooming until it was done, but we just got to yank it out and put something more in. So even in July, you can see if you look at the ground, I've got seed trays still on the ground. I have staked the dahlias. My staking of dahlias this year did not go well. I'll be the first one to admit. But in July, we started to get our first dahlia blooms, even though the weather is so incredibly hot. And of course, our beautiful, gorgeous, amazing zinnias came into bloom as well. That's one of the main things I love about zinnias so much, is that they bloom so incredibly fast. You know, boom, you plant them, you kind of mistreat them, they're okay with it, they're forgiving. We also had our sunflowers getting nice and tall. Just the combination of zinnias and sunflowers, it is such a classic combination. I just can't get enough zinnias and sunflowers together. I know they're like really basic, and some people are like, oh, that's kind of boring. But especially with a lot of the different zinnia varieties getting introduced that are gorgeous. We also have our Lisianthus blooming at this time. That's one of the reasons I kind of like Lisianthus, because you have to get them in the ground early as transplants. But once you do, you know, I transplanted, as you can see here, back in April. You can see the size of them. They're very, very small. And, you know, they grow so slow, they keep this small size until they bloom. But once they do, they are just a powerhouse. And you can clip them back and usually get a second bloom in the fall if you take care of them. That's something I struggle with just because the weeds are so aggressive in my yard. I have lots of creeping Charlie vine that is just almost impossible to control sometimes. Lots of these Lisianthus were damaged by summer thunderstorms. But, you know, it is what it is. We're just growing them out in the yard, not under protection. Once August finally gets here, the Lisianthus are pretty much wrapping up for their first kind of burst of bloom, or what I would consider their first burst. And, you know, things are still looking really nice in the garden. We have a lot of things coming together to kind of form the core of our summer garden, and this includes, of course, our zinnias. Even more zinnias. As you saw in August, they started to bloom, but once September arrives, they're really coming into a full, just strong burst of flowers here in my yard. Of course, these zinnias were planted a little bit later than I usually do, so, you know, of course, zinnias can kind of vary depending upon when you plant them, and you can always succession plant them and get tons and tons of zinnias all summer long if you have ample space to do that, which I wish I did, but I usually just plant kind of one burst of zinnias. I get them and then they're done. We begin to see our dahlias blooming. We have so many dahlias this year, from dinner plates to ball dahlias to little kind of pom-pom cutie dahlias. We had so many of them. And, you know, they multiply like crazy, which you'll see a little bit later. And I think I have a problem. I think I have a full-on dahlia addiction, and I think I need some kind of dahlia support group because these are gorgeous. I just can't get enough of the rich, creamy, coral, peachy pink tones. I was able to pick buckets and buckets of these this year, which was kind of like, it was great. But it was also really disappointing because I wasn't able to give them away or anything. I still gave a few away to like my family and stuff, but it was kind of a flop in terms of the donation garden this year. And hopefully next year will be better, and we'll cross our fingers and next year is better. And if it is, we'll be prepared. Also blooming late in the season was our first attempt at Gomphrena. It was fine, it was pretty, but I'm not really impressed with it. It kind of just is a low grower that takes up space. In the future, I'd grow it again, but for now, it's not a good fit for my yard, for my tiny little backyard. So September arrives, and we have lots and lots of sunflowers. We have these beautiful, interesting celosia. These celosia were also transplanted late. You can see this is the kurume, or I don't know how to say it, crested type that is so pretty. I love these interesting bicolors with the red and the yellow is one of my favorites. I know some people hate that these look like brains, but I think they are so cool. I would love to have a big field of these. Again, I don't. It seems like spacing really affects the size of these, and I think that's one of the reasons that I have so much trouble growing it here in the yard is because my spacing has to be small because I ain't got very much room. But we'll adapt to that in the future. Also, lots and lots of buckets of sunflowers. This was beautiful. This was actually one of the buckets that I did get to donate this year. It's a long story, but we had this beautiful Double Delight mix. I bought this from GeoSeed, not a sponsor, as always. And these turned out to be one of my absolute favorite flowers this year. They were so consistently double and tall and beautiful and uniform. I definitely want to grow these again in the future. We also had a lot of members of the Pro Cut series that came into bloom. A little bit smaller than normal, again, just because I planted them so close together. You can definitely space these out more, and you will get larger flowers. It's just one of those things that I have to do out of necessity in my yard. We also had some plume celosia and some kind of fancier sunflower varieties. By this time, our hardy annual seeds had also already been started in our trays. As you can see, our germination rates were really, really good. And at the end of September and into October, we're going to be thinking about transplanting these into the garden. And in this month, our chrysanthemums started to bloom. Now, this was the first time I was really kind of successful with chrysanthemums, and I am not disappointed. So many bright, vibrant colors and so many interesting shapes, and the long growing season really, really helped with that this year. When October arrived, many of my chrysanthemums were kind of getting started and, full bloom. Here we come. I could see it coming. All the plants were budded up. So many rich, beautiful colors. Like we have this Seaton's J'adore. I don't know how to say it, obviously. And Coral Charm was another beautiful one, as well as Apricot Alexis and just normal Alexis. These all came from the King's Mums website. I get asked that all the time. Not a sponsor, I have to say that. But I cannot wait to order more chrysanthemums this year. I had so much fun And you know, the thing about chrysanthemums is that they do tend to take up a lot of space before, before they bloom, because they sit there all season long. But once they do, it's great. At the end of this month, after the frost, I also collected some dahlia seeds. A lot of you guys actually, I sent you guys dahlia seeds, which is cool and exciting. I'm interested to see if those grow, how those work. Frost finally came, and it was time to dig our dahlias up. Since I am here in zone 6B7, I went ahead and dug my dahlias. I probably could have left them in the ground to overwinter with a little bit of protection. But like I said, my yard is so small, I need to move things around and kind of keep track of what goes where. And these dahlias were growing in a spot where I needed to plant my new tulip bulbs for this season. So they had to come out of the ground. In addition to them coming out of the ground, I also divided them at this time. If you want all of the details for the kind of whole process of digging the dahlia tubers and washing them and dividing them and, storing them, it's a whole big process. It wasn't too bad. It only took me a couple days, maybe 4 hours tops. That's probably 4 hours tops to get everything divided, washed, dug, and stored. It wasn't too bad of a job, honestly. But as you can see, when you do buy these dahlia tubers, they will reward you very, very generously in terms of producing new tubers. In just this one clump, I planted one little tuber and I got one huge clump in return. I might have a dahlia tuber sale in the spring, probably in March, to get rid of some of these tubers. A lot of them are not labeled, but I'm thinking of kind of doing just a quick sale, like go on my website. They're all $3 and you get a random mix. So $3 tubers each, and you get a completely random tuber. I might consider doing that. I just have to wait and see how everything's stored over winter. I checked on them the other day. So far, they all look great. So I'm expecting good things. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Got them packed up in some vermiculite, so it should be good to go. Now, here in November, here's what our hoop house looks like. This was actually at the end of November is what this hoop house looks like. And you can see it looks very, very different than it did this time, back in January. My transplants are very, very small. They were started in trays in October and September. I've transplanted my anemones. You can barely even see that any growth has occurred. You can just barely see the growing tips poking out of the little corms. Not good. We're just, we're going with the flow. It is what it is. All those kind of expressions. Our early planted ranunculus that we planted back in October, looking good. But we have several other ranunculus that are much, much smaller. We've transplanted our biennial flowers. This bed is a little bit too shady. Hopefully it will grow well. We're just trying to keep a good outlook on this because some things are out of your control. And sometimes you get behind, and that's all you can do is just keep going forward. Before I completely forget, of course, we have to mention that this is the month that I have planted my daffodils and my tulips. Now, I don't have video in this video of the tulips, but I have a whole completely different video planting the tulips. This season, we went absolutely crazy with the flowering bulbs, especially daffodils, which I really, really want to establish in my yard because they are perennial and they will return every single season. Of course, I treat my tulips as annual, such as something I have to personally do. I know a lot of people don't like that. But hey, it's your garden, you do you, and that's all that matters. I'm really, really eager to see these daffodils come up, even though we got a really, really late start technically on planting them. The shipments were just delayed, and there's nothing that we can do about that, but really excited for those as well. So as December approaches, I was so happy to cover this hoop house and just cover it with frost blankets and get everything nestled in and tucked away. And I got it just tucked away just in time for the cold to hit and snow and things like that. So that's really about it for this garden rewind. I really hope that it was helpful. I'm not quite sure if it was. Lots and lots of stuff going on here in the garden, that's for sure. It'll be fun to see how this all plays out with our new plantings that we've made for 2021, and hopefully it grows just as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I really appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. I'd absolutely love to have you. Always looking forward to growing our little small garden community. So much fun. Thank you so much for watching. As always, the link to Patreon and to our blog and to our wax melt shop, everything is down in the description below. Be sure to check out our new merch if you want. We've got a lot of cool merch. Just click on the little merch shelf and it should take you there. I hope that you are having an incredible day, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye, guys. Oh, hey, hello. Are you still here? That's awesome. I know a lot of people ask me whether or not you can really grow cut flowers in a small backyard, especially a small backyard like mine, which is only about 30 feet by 30 feet. And the answer to that, I think, is definitely yes, of course. As you can see in this video, there are tons of flowers that we're growing, and I kind of generally divide up the plants into early, mid, and late season bloomers. But I thought it would be fun to show you guys all of the flower arrangements that we've made this season, and kind of have a little end of the video, end of the year compilation of every flower arrangement, almost every one that we made this season. I hope that you guys really enjoy it. I did my best to edit this one, but I'm not very good at it, so I apologize. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye, guys.